The baby isn't yours, my wife said casually over coffee. After 12 years together, I thought we had a life built on trust, but it was all just the beginning. Those 4 words shattered my world on an ordinary Tuesday morning. My wife Elena didn't even look up from her phone as she delivered this devastating news, as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. We've been married for 12 years, built a life together, or so I thought. The steaming coffee in my mug suddenly felt ice cold. I set my cup down slowly, watching the dark liquid ripple. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady for someone whose entire world had just imploded. How long have you known? About 6 months, she replied, finally meeting my eyes. There was no remorse there, no hint of guilt or shame. Just cold calculation in those green eyes I'd once written poetry about. Marcus, I've been meaning to tell you, but what? I cut her off, my voice quiet but sharp. But you were too busy spending the small fortune I invested in your tech startup? Too occupied with the fancy parties you've been throwing with my family's money? Or maybe you were too preoccupied with whoever the real father is. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She hadn't expected me to make those connections so quickly. Nobody ever did. They always underestimated me because I was quiet, because I preferred building things in my workshop to attending her glittering social gatherings. My sister Diane had warned me about Elena's ambitions when I first started dating her, but I'd been too blinded by love to listen. The money has nothing to do with this, Elena said, waving her hand dismissively. And honestly, Marcus, you should be thanking me. We both know you never really wanted children. I did you a favor. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The same floor I'd installed with my own hands when we first bought this house. My eyes drifted to our family photos on the wall. Elena and me on our wedding day. Her in white, me looking at her like she'd hung the moon. The ultrasound picture from 3 months ago, the one I'd framed myself. The image of our supposed future. All lies. Does anyone else know? Just Rachel. Of course her sister knew. Rachel, who'd been living in our guest house rent-free for the past year while finding herself. Rachel, who'd probably been helping Elena plan this all along. I walked out without another word, letting the door click shut behind me. In my workshop, surrounded by the half-finished furniture pieces I crafted in my spare time, I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first to my lawyer, James. The second to my old friend Michael, who happened to be one of the best forensic accountants in the city. What Elena didn't know was that I'd seen the paperwork she'd accidentally left on her desk last week. Documents about transferring company assets, changing beneficiaries. She thought she was being clever, but 12 years of marriage had taught me to recognize her tells. The slight tremor in her voice when she lied. The way she'd been extra affectionate lately, laying the groundwork for whatever she had planned. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Asterisk, she told you? Finally. Look, I know this seems bad, but Elena has a plan that could work for everyone. Call me? Asterisk. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Every suspicious transaction, every odd meeting, every late-night phone call over the past year. Elena thought she was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. She didn't realize I'd been watching the game unfold all along. That evening, an email from Michael landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "You're going to want to see this." Attached were bank statements showing systematic transfers from my company's accounts to a series of shell corporations. Elena hadn't just been planning for her future. She'd been actively stealing from me for months. But that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Elena's tech startup, her pride and joy, was built on stolen technology. She'd been pirating proprietary code from my company's development team, repackaging it as her own innovations. Every award she'd won, every magazine cover she'd graced, every TED Talk she'd given, all built on lies. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and started piecing together the extent of her betrayal. The evidence was damning. Not only had she stolen company secrets, but she'd also been systematically dismantling my reputation within the industry. Anonymous tips to competitors, whispered doubts about my leadership capabilities at board meetings, carefully orchestrated coincidences that made me look incompetent. A knock at my workshop door interrupted my thoughts. It was Sarah, my assistant of 5 years, holding a stack of files. "Mr. Chun," she said, her face grim, "I think there's something you need to see." Sarah, it turned out, had been keeping her own records. She'd noticed irregularities in Elena's visits to the office, particularly late-night meetings with James Morton, a Silicon Valley veteran who served on our board. Security footage, visitor logs, suspicious changes to project files. Sarah had documented it all. "I tried to warn you," Sarah said quietly. "But Elena always had an explanation, and she was your wife." I nodded, understanding the impossible position she'd been in. "How long have you known?" "I started noticing things about 8 months ago, right after Elena announced her pregnancy. Sarah hesitated. There's more. Morton? He's been accessing our secure servers using Elena's credentials. They've downloaded virtually everything, project blueprints, client lists, research and development data. My hands tightened around the whiskey glass. James Morton, the man who'd mentored Elena, who'd praised her innovative thinking and technological brilliance. The man I'd trusted with a seat on my board. The man who, I now realized, was most likely the father of Elena's baby. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. Asterisk, Elena's worried about you. She says you're not answering her calls. Can we talk about this like adults? Asterisk. I almost laughed. Like adults? They've been treating me like a fool for months, maybe years. Elena, Rachel, Morton. They'd all underestimated me. They saw what they wanted to see. The quiet craftsman, more comfortable with wood and tools than corporate politics. They never realized that the same patience that allowed me to turn raw lumber into fine furniture had taught me to observe, to plan, to wait for the right moment. I opened my laptop and began composing emails. One to my lawyer, detailing the evidence of corporate espionage. Another to the board, calling for an emergency meeting. A third to my private investigator. It was time to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. Elena had taught me an invaluable lesson. Trust, like furniture, could be broken beyond repair. But unlike furniture, some things weren't worth fixing. Some things needed to be completely dismantled, stripped down to their foundation, exposed for what they truly were. Sarah watched me work, her face reflecting a mix of concern and relief. What are you going to do? I closed my laptop and finished my whiskey. I'm going to do what I do best, Sarah. I'm going to build something. Build what? A trap. I stood up, my mind already mapping out the steps ahead. Elena and Morton think they're playing chess, but they've been moving pieces on the wrong board. As if on cue, my phone lit up with an email notification. Morton was calling an urgent board meeting for tomorrow morning, probably planning to make his move, to use whatever leverage he and Elena had gathered to force me out. They had no idea what was coming. I spent the next few hours in my workshop, the steady rhythm of sanding would helping me think. Each stroke brought more clarity, more purpose. Elena had chosen her moment carefully, thinking she caught me off guard. She didn't realize she'd just given me exactly what I needed. A reason to stop holding back. By midnight, my plan was ready. Like any good craftsman, I'd learned that the key to creating something lasting was in the preparation. Elena and Morton had built their scheme on lies and manipulation. I would bring it down with truth and precision. Tomorrow would be interesting. Very interesting indeed. The next morning, Elena was already at her office when the auditors arrived. I watched through the security cameras I'd had installed last month as they walked in, boxes in hand. Her face when they started pulling files, that moment of realization that her carefully constructed plan was unraveling, was something I'd remember forever. The morning of the board meeting dawned cold and gray. I arrived early, watching through the lobby security cameras as they filed in one by one. Elena, immaculate as always in a designer suit that my money had probably paid for. Morton, radiating smug confidence. Rachel, trying to look professional despite the anxiety evident in her fidgeting hands. The other board members, unaware they were about to witness the dismantling of a carefully constructed fraud. I waited in my workshop until Sarah texted. They're all here. Elena's already started talking about restructuring the company leadership. Perfect. Let them think they had the upper hand. I entered the boardroom exactly 15 minutes late, carrying a simple wooden box I'd made the night before. Elena faltered mid-sentence, her practice speech about necessary changes in leadership dying on her lips. Marcus, Morton spoke up, his tone condescending. We were just discussing some concerns about the company's direction. Were you? I set the box on the table. Before we continue, I have some concerns of my own to address. I opened the box and began laying out documents. Bank statements, security logs, server access records. With each piece of paper, I watched Elena's carefully maintained composure crack just a little more. What is this? She demanded, but her voice trembled slightly. Evidence, I replied calmly, of corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, and fraud. Would anyone like to guess whose signatures are all over these documents? Rachel stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Elena has done nothing but help this company grow. Sit down, Rachel. I cut her off. Unless you'd like me to share the evidence of your involvement too? The offshore accounts you helped set up? The fake consulting contracts? She sank back into her chair, face pale. Morton tried to seize control. These are serious accusations, Marcus. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Like you privately discussed stealing my company's technology? I connected my laptop to the room's display screen. Or like you privately discussed the baby's paternity with Elena? The room went deadly silent. On the screen, Security footage played showing Morton and Elena in intimate moments throughout the office. Following that, email exchanges about their plans to force me out. Bank transfers, meeting logs, everything. I have to admit, I continued, my voice steady, you were thorough, but you made one crucial mistake. You thought my passion for craftsmanship was a weakness. That because I prefer working with my hands. I must be simple, naive. I turned to Elena. You never understood that the same patience that lets me turn raw wood into something beautiful also taught me to observe, to plan, to wait for the right moment. The board will never, Morton began, but I wasn't finished. The SEC is very interested in your trading patterns, James, particularly around the announcements of Elena's supposedly innovative breakthroughs. Imagine their surprise when they learned those breakthroughs were stolen from the very company you were meant to help guide. One of the other board members, Janet Chin, no relation, spoke up. How long has this been going on? Long enough, I replied, pulling out more documents. But not as long as it's going to take them to explain it to federal investigators. Elena's mask finally cracked completely. You can't prove anything. It's your word against. Actually, Sarah said from the doorway, it's your words. She entered, carrying a small device. Did you know your office was bugged? Standard security protocol. Really? We have quite a collection of interesting conversations. The next hour was chaos. Elena tried to deny everything, then tried to blame Morton, then tried to paint herself as a victim. Morton threatened lawyers, then tried to cut a deal. Rachel broke down completely, admitting to everything in exchange for leniency. By the time the FBI agents arrived, right on schedule, Elena's perfectly crafted world was in shambles. As they led her and Morton out in handcuffs, she turned to me one last time. I never thought you'd fight back, she said, almost wondering. I smiled slightly. That was your mistake. You confused kindness with weakness, patience with passivity. You should have paid more attention to my work, Elena. The strongest pieces are the ones that take the most time to craft. After they were gone, I sat alone in my workshop, running my hands over the smooth wood of the crib I'd been building. I'd donate it tomorrow, along with every other trace of the life I'd thought I was building with Elena. My phone buzzed, a message from Michael. SEC is moving fast. Elena's company stock is worthless. Morton's other ventures are being investigated. You okay? I looked around my workshop, at the tools and wood that had always been my true companions. Elena had wanted to build an empire on lies. I'd build mine the same way I built my furniture, with patience, precision, and absolute integrity. I'm fine, I texted back, just getting started. Because while Elena and her conspirators were facing years in federal prison, I was facing something else entirely. A fresh start, a clean slate, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, the best revenge isn't just winning. It's winning with style. The weeks following Elena's arrest were a blur of legal meetings, press statements, and shocking revelations. Each day seemed to uncover a new layer of deception, a deeper level of betrayal. The media dubbed it the Silicon Valley's perfect storm, a scandal that combined corporate espionage, marital infidelity, and financial fraud into one explosive package. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my workshop where the smell of sawdust and varnish could temporarily drown out the chaos. The rhythmic motion of sanding would become my therapy, each stroke helping to smooth away the rough edges of my anger and pain. Sarah had become invaluable, handling the press and managing the company while I focused on steadying our ship. One morning, she brought coffee to my workshop, her face grave. The forensic accountants found something else, she said, setting down a thick folder. Elena wasn't just stealing from the company. She was selling our client data to competitors. I set down my sandpaper. How bad? Bad enough that 3 major tech firms are looking to sue her separately. She hesitated. There's more. Remember that charity foundation she started last year? Of course I remembered. Elena had insisted on starting a foundation to support women in tech. I donated millions, proud of her apparent dedication to helping others. What a fool I'd been. Let me guess, I said wearily. Another scam? Sarah nodded. The money was being funneled through shell companies. Most of it ended up in offshore accounts controlled by Morton. They were planning this for years, Marcus. I stood up, walking to the window. Outside, removal crews were clearing out Elena's home office. Each box they carried out represented another piece of our shared life being dismantled. But among the documents they'd found was something that made my blood run cold. Detailed plans for what would have happened after I was forced out. Elena and Morton hadn't just planned to take my company. They'd planned to destroy me completely. Fabricated evidence of embezzlement. Whisper campaigns about mental instability. Even a carefully constructed narrative about domestic abuse, complete with doctored photos and paid witnesses. They would have ruined me, I said quietly. Sarah touched my arm gently. But they didn't. You stopped them. My phone buzzed. Another email from Elena's prison account. Unlike the others, this one's subject line caught my attention. You don't know everything. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Marcus, by now you think you know the full story. You don't. What happened with the baby wasn't just about betrayal. There are things you still don't understand. Things that would make you question everything. Meet with my lawyer. Please. Elena. I showed the email to Sarah. She frowned. It's probably another manipulation. Probably, I agreed. But what if it's not? That afternoon, I met with Elena's lawyer, expecting more lies. Instead, he handed me a USB drive and a handwritten letter. She insisted these be delivered together, he said. Said you'd understand once you saw them. Back in my workshop, I plugged in the drive. What I found shook me to my core. Videos, emails, and documents revealing a conspiracy far larger than I'd imagined. Elena and Morton hadn't been working alone. They'd been part of a sophisticated corporate espionage ring, targeting multiple tech companies. And at the center of it all was someone I never expected, my own father. The letter was short. Now you know why I chose you. Your father has been playing this game longer than either of us. I was sent to destroy you, but I made a different choice. The baby may not be yours, but neither is this vendetta. Look deeper into the Maxwell contract from 2019. Everything started there. I deserve what's happening to me, but your father deserves worse. I sat back, my mind reeling. The Maxwell contract, the deal that had launched my company into the big leagues. The deal my father had helped broker before his convenient retirement to the Cayman Islands. Sarah found me still sitting there hours later, surrounded by old contract files and financial records. Marcus, what is it? I looked up at her, seeing for the first time how she'd always been there. Always watching. Always protecting the company. Always protecting me. Sarah, I need you to help me understand something. I spread out the documents. I think we're not at the end of this story. We're just at the beginning of a much bigger one. She sat down beside me, and together we began to unravel a web of corruption that went back decades. Elena had been right about one thing. I didn't know everything, but I was about to. The smooth wood of my workbench felt solid beneath my hands, grounding me as my world tilted on its axis once again. I'd thought Elena's betrayal was the end of the story. Instead, it was just the first cut in what would become my masterpiece of justice. What are you going to do? Sarah asked softly. I picked up a piece of sandpaper, feeling its rough surface. The same thing I always do. I'm going to take something rough and ugly, and I'm going to turn it into something true and beautiful. And your father? I smiled grimly. He's about to learn what happens when you try to tear down something I've built. The workshop lights cast long shadows as evening fell. Somewhere in the Caymans, my father was probably feeling very pleased with himself. That would change soon enough, because Elena had taught me how to recognize betrayal, but my father, he was about to teach me how far I would go to get justice. The Cayman Islands in September were exactly as I remembered from childhood vacations: pristine beaches, crystal waters, and enough banking secrecy to hide 1,000 sins. I sat in a rented car outside the Global Financial Center, watching my father through binoculars as he entered the building for his daily 9 a.m. meeting. Target is entering the building, Michael's voice crackled through my earpiece. You sure you want to do this? I adjusted my tie, Italian silk, the kind my father always favored. He taught me everything I know about business, Michael. Time to show him how well I learned. The past month had been a crash course in corporate espionage, the legal kind. Every document Elena had provided led to another shell company, another offshore account, another piece of the puzzle. My father, Richard Chun, hadn't just helped orchestrate Elena's infiltration of my company. He'd been systematically destroying his competitors for decades, using a network of planted spouses, manipulated executives, and corrupted officials. The Maxwell contract that had made my company famous? It was built on stolen technology my father had helped steal through his network. Elena had been just one piece in his elaborate game. Movement at the South Entrance, Michael reported. Your sister's here. Right on schedule. Diana Chun, my father's pride and joy, his trusted lieutenant. The sister who'd warned me about Elena, but never about our father's true nature. Was she another pawn? Or something worse? I stepped out of the car, straightening my jacket. The security guard at the entrance nodded respectfully. My father's son was always welcome here. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to recall Sarah's last briefing. Your father's company is leveraged to the hilt, she'd explained, pointing to complex financial diagrams. He's been using your company's success to prop up his empire. Without the Maxwell contract, without the contract I was about to expose as fraudulent, my father's carefully constructed house of cards would collapse. The thought should have troubled me more than it did. The conference room doors opened to reveal exactly the scene I'd expected. My father, imperious in his bespoke suit, at the head of the table. Diana at his right hand. A dozen board members arranged like loyal subjects around their king. Marcus. My father's surprise seemed genuine. What are you doing here? I smiled, the same smile he'd taught me to use in negotiations. Hello, father. I thought it was time we discussed the Maxwell contract, and Elena, and all the other things you've been keeping from me. Diana's face went pale. She knew. Of course she knew. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, my father replied smoothly, though I was sorry to hear about Elena's indiscretions. I placed a wooden box on the table, another piece I'd crafted myself, this one made from the same rare rosewood as my father's desk. Then let me refresh your memory. One by one, I laid out the evidence. Emails, bank transfers, recorded conversations, the complete architecture of his decades-long scheme. Did you really think Elena would stay loyal? I asked quietly. She gave me everything, father. Every detail of how you recruited her, how you plan to use her to take control of my company, how you've done the same thing to dozens of other firms. These are very serious accusations. One of the board members began, but I cut him off. They're not accusations. They're facts. Facts that the SEC, FBI, and international banking authorities are receiving right now. I checked my watch. In fact, they should be serving search warrants at all your subsidiary offices right about now. My father's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the rage beneath. You fool. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, father, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing what you taught me, eliminating the competition. The only difference is, I'm doing it legally. Diana stood up abruptly. Marcus, please. We can explain everything. Like you explained why you really warned me about Elena? I turned to her. Was that guilt, Diana? Or just part of the plan? The caring sister trying to protect her brother, building trust so you could use it against me later. It wasn't like that, she protested. But her eyes told a different story. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Warrants served. All accounts frozen. Media getting wind of the story. You know what the funny thing is? I continued, watching my father's face as his empire began to crumble. I learned it all from you. The patience, the planning, the attention to detail. You taught me that the best traps are the ones your enemies walk into willingly. Through the conference room windows, I could see police cars arriving below. My father saw them too. You're destroying our family, he snarled. No, father. You did that when you decided to use my wife to destroy me. When you turned my sister into your accomplice. When you built your success on betrayal and fraud. I stood up as federal agents entered the room. The difference between us? I built my company with my own hands, creating something real. You built yours with lies and manipulation. Let's see which one survives. As they led my father and sister away, he turned to me one last time. I was trying to make you stronger. You did, I replied. Just not the way you intended. Back in my hotel room that night, I called Sarah. It's done. How bad is the fallout? Your father's company's stock is in freefall. The board is cooperating fully with authorities. Diana's already offering to testify against him. I stared out at the Caribbean sunset, remembering family vacations here, back when I thought I understood what family meant. Marcus, Sarah hesitated. There's something else. Elena's asking to see you. Says there's one more thing you need to know. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of more revelations to come. Book me on the next flight back. It's time to finish this. Because while I'd exposed my father's crimes and avenged Elena's betrayal, something told me the real story, the one that would change everything, was still waiting to be uncovered.